I've always prided myself on being the guy who could fix anything. You name it, broken processes, failing projects, sinking profits. I'd step in and turn them around like some corporate magician. At least, that's what I thought until recently. My name's Ethan Carter, but everyone calls me Eli. I'm 34 years old, a business strategist at Pinnacle Capital Group, one of those high-powered financial firms nestled in the heart of New York City. For the past 5 years, I've poured my soul into this company. And just last quarter, I doubled our annual profits. Doubled them. Not bad for someone who started as an intern, right? But here's the kicker. Instead of celebrating me or even acknowledging how much I've done for this place, they call me expendable. Yeah, you heard that right. Expendable. It stung more than I care to admit because deep down, I knew it wasn't entirely unexpected. This is Wall Street, after all, a world where people are treated like numbers on a spreadsheet. Still, hearing it hit differently when it came from him. Richard Whitmore, the CEO, said it during one of his private pep talks disguised as feedback sessions. He didn't say it outright, of course. No, he was too slick for that. But the implication was clear enough to cut through my confidence like a knife. It was Clara who first noticed something was off with me. She's my closest friend here, probably my only real ally in this Shark Tank. And she has a way of reading me better than anyone else. After meeting with Richard, I went straight to a pub down the street, nursing a pint while replaying his words over and over in my head. "You're letting him get to you again," Clara said, sliding onto the stool next to mine. Her voice carried that mix of concern and frustration she reserved specifically for moments like these. Am I shot back, maybe sharper than I intended, because it feels pretty damn personal when your boss tells you, "Don't mistake yourself for irreplaceable." Clara sighed, shaking her head. "Eli, you know how Richard is. He doesn't mean anything by it. He's just trying to keep you grounded." Grounded? I laughed bitterly. "Clara, I doubled their profits. I saved this company from bleeding cash faster than a sieve. And now I'm supposed to sit quietly while they pat Victor Hale on the back for ideas I came up with? That's not grounding, it's gaslighting." She didn't respond immediately, which told me everything I needed to know. Deep down, she agreed with me, but she also knew better than to fan the flames of my anger. Instead, she changed the subject, asking if I wanted another drink. I declined, though not because I didn't want one. Something about tonight felt heavier, like the beginning of something I couldn't quite put my finger on yet. The first sign that things were about to go south came a week later. I was grabbing coffee in the break room when I overheard Victor talking to Richard outside the conference room. Their voices were low, but the acoustics in that hallway made eavesdropping unavoidable. "He's too emotionally invested," Victor was saying. "If we don't give him a break soon, he'll burn out. We can't afford to lose momentum on these projects." Burn out? Was he serious? I nearly choked on my latte. If anyone was burning out, it sure as hell wasn't me. I worked harder than half the executive team combined, and they knew it. But then Richard chimed in, his tone casual but dismissive. "Fine. Reassign him to something less critical. Let's see how indispensable he really is." My blood ran cold. Just like that, I went from golden boy to bench warmer, all without so much as a conversation. I stood there frozen, gripping my cup so tightly I thought it might shatter. For a moment, I considered storming out and calling them both out on their bullshit. But something stopped me. Maybe it was pride. Or maybe it was a realization that proving a point wouldn't be enough. They needed to see exactly what losing me would cost them. When Pinnacle held its quarterly celebration event 2 weeks later, I already knew what to expect. The entire floor buzzed with excitement as employees gathered in the grand hall, champagne flutes in hand. Richard took the stage, his usual charm radiating as he praised the team for another record-breaking quarter. Then he turned to Victor, clapping him on the shoulder like they were old buddies. "And let's hear for Victor Hale," Richard announced, his voice booming through the microphone. "His leadership on several key initiatives has been instrumental in driving our success." The crowd erupted into applause, but I barely heard it. I stood near the back of the room, watching as Victor basked in the spotlight, smiling smugly like he'd earned every ounce of credit. my fists clenched involuntarily, nails digging into my palms. Every word Richard spoke felt like a slap in the face, a deliberate erasure of everything I'd accomplished. Later that night, I confronted Richard in his office. The glass walls reflected the city skyline behind him, making him look larger than life. But I wasn't intimidated anymore. "You know those key initiatives you praised Victor for?" I said, stepping closer. "They were mine. All of them. And you know it." Richard leaned back in his chair, unfazed. "Ethan, don't make this personal. You're good at what you do, but don't mistake yourself for irreplaceable." His words echoed in my head long after I left his office. That's when I decided, fine, if they wanted to treat me like expendable, I'd show them exactly what that meant. Over the next few days, I started documenting everything. Every strategy I'd implemented, every process I'd streamlined, every client relationship I'd nurtured. I wrote it all down. Then I began subtly tweaking operations in ways that only I understood. Nothing drastic, just enough to create cracks once I was gone. Clara caught wind of what I was doing and confronted me one evening as we walked home together. "What are you planning, Eli?" she asked, her tone sharp with worry. "You're setting yourself up for disaster." "No," I corrected her. "I'm setting them up for disaster. When I leave, they'll realize exactly how much they relied on me. And trust me, Clara, they won't forget any time soon." She didn't argue further, but I could tell she disapproved. Still, I didn't care. This wasn't about revenge. It was about respect. Respect they refused to give me until now. The day I handed in my resignation letter, I felt a strange mix of relief and dread. Relief because I was finally free, or at least on my way to freedom. And dread because I knew the storm I was about to unleash would shake Pinnacle to its core. Richard didn't even blink when I slid the envelope across his desk. He glanced at it briefly, then looked up at me with that same dismissive expression he always wore. "Are you sure about this, Ethan?" he asked, his tone suggesting he already knew the answer. "You're walking away from a lot here." "I'm not walking away," I replied, meeting his gaze steadily. "I'm stepping aside so you can see what happens when you treat your best assets like liabilities." He raised an eyebrow, but said nothing more. As I left his office, I couldn't help but feel a small pang of satisfaction. The game was officially on. Later that evening, Clara cornered me in the parking garage. Her arms were crossed, and her eyes burned with frustration. "You're really doing this, aren't you?" she demanded. "You're going to let them fall apart just to prove a point?" "It's not about proving a point," I shot back, though her words stung more than I cared to admit. "It's about showing them they made a mistake, a big one, and if they don't learn from it, then maybe they deserve to fail." Clara sighed, shaking her head. "Just be careful, okay? You're playing with fire, Eli. Fire has a way of burning everyone around it." Her warning lingered in my mind as I drove home, but I pushed it aside. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about justice. Justice for every late night, every overlooked contribution, every time I've been treated like nothing more than a cog in their machine. Within weeks, the cracks began to show. At first, it was subtle. Missed deadlines, miscommunications between departments, client expressing dissatisfaction with the quality of service. But soon, the problems escalated. One major project stalled entirely after Victor botched negotiations with a key vendor. Another client pulled out altogether, citing unmet expectations. I monitored everything from afar, keeping tabs through industry news and whispers from former colleagues. Clara texted me occasionally, updating me on the chaos unfolding inside Pinnacle. "They're blaming each other," she wrote one afternoon. "Victor tried to pin it all on logistics, but no one believes him. Richard looks like he hasn't slept in days." Good, I thought. Let them scramble. Let them realize how much they relied on me. Still, there were moments when guilt crept in. I hated seeing people suffer because of decisions made by those above them, but I reminded myself that this wasn't my fault. It was theirs. They had chosen to ignore my warnings, to dismiss my contributions. Now they were reaping what they'd sown. Things really blew up when the media got involved. A financial analyst published an article questioning Pinnacle's sudden decline, speculating about internal mismanagement and leadership failures. The piece went viral overnight, sparking debates across social media and business forums. I watched it all unfold from the sidelines, resisting the urge to comment publicly. Instead, I reached out to Jonathan Reed, an old mentor of mine who now ran a successful consulting firm. We met for coffee at a quiet cafe downtown, where I pitched him an idea. What if we launched our own firm? I suggested, leaning forward eagerly. We could specialize in helping struggling companies turn things around. With my experience and your network, we'd have a killer combination. Jonathan listened intently, stroking his beard as he considered my proposal. Finally, he nodded. I like it. But are you ready for this, Eli? Once you step into the spotlight, there's no turning back. I've never been more ready, I replied, my voice steady despite the nerves churning in my stomach. By the end of the meeting, we had a plan. Our first target? A direct competitor of Pinnacle Capital Group. Our new consulting firm, Carter and Reed Strategies, hit the ground running. Within months, we secured several high-profile clients, including one of Pinnacle's biggest rivals. It wasn't hard. They were desperate for guidance after losing ground to Pinnacle during my tenure. Irony, right? Word of our success spread quickly, drawing attention from both the business community and the press. Reporters started reaching out, eager to hear my side of the story. I declined most interviews, preferring to let my work speak for itself. But one journalist persisted, managing to wrangle a brief phone call. So, Ethan, she began, her tone probing, do you think Pinnacle regrets letting you go? I chuckled softly, choosing my words carefully. Let's just say I hope they've learned the value of appreciating talent while they still have it. Her follow-up question caught me off guard. And what about you? Do you regret leaving? For a moment, I hesitated. Did I? Leaving Pinnacle had been painful, but it had also forced me to grow in ways I never expected. I was building something meaningful now, something entirely my own. No, I answered finally. Not for a second. The final straw came when Pinnacle lost a major client, a deal I had personally negotiated years ago. The news broke during a tense board meeting, sending shockwaves through the company. Richard called an emergency session, demanding answers. Victor tried to deflect blame, pointing fingers at everyone except himself. But the board wasn't buying anymore. One member spoke up, voicing what everyone else was thinking. We need Ethan back, he said bluntly. Plain and simple. Richard balked at the suggestion, insisting they could fix things without me. But the damage was done. The cracks in Pinnacle's foundation were widening, and no amount of denial could stop the collapse. As I read about the fallout online, I allowed myself a small smile. They were starting to understand, starting to see what losing me truly cost them. But this wasn't over yet, not by a long shot. It was surreal. Sitting in my sleek new office at Carter and Reed Strategies, watching the chaos unfold at Pinnacle from behind screen. I had built this space to reflect everything Pinnacle wasn't. Open, transparent, collaborative. The walls were lined with whiteboards covered in colorful diagrams, and natural light poured through floor-to-ceiling windows. It was a stark contrast to the dimly lit corridors of Pinnacle's corporate fortress. Then came the call. Richard Whitmore himself dialed me directly, a move so desperate it almost made me laugh. Almost. Ethan, he began, his voice strained but still laced with that practiced charm. We need to talk. I leaned back in my chair, feigning nonchalance. Oh, about what? You know damn well what. He snapped, losing his composure for just a moment before regaining control. Look, we're willing to make things right. Name your price. My chest tightened, though I didn't let it show. Part of me wanted to accept, to march back into Pinnacle like a triumphant hero and watch them grovel. But another part, the wiser part, knew that return would only validate their belief that they could treat people however they pleased, as long as they threw money at the problem later. I appreciate the offer, I said coolly, but I've moved on. Maybe you should too. There was a long pause on the other end. When Richard finally spoke again, his tone was icy. You think this is over, Ethan? You have no idea what you're messing with. The line went dead. I stared at my phone for a moment, adrenaline coursing through me. He wasn't bluffing. This wasn't just about pride anymore. It was personal now. If Richard thought threatening me would scare me off, he underestimated how far I was willing to go. Over the next few days, I dug deeper into Pinnacle's operations than ever before. Using old contacts and leveraging information I gathered during my time there, I uncovered something that sent chills down my spine. Evidence of unethical practices. It started small, a suspicious transaction here, an unexplained discrepancy there. But soon, the pieces fell into place. Pinnacle had been cutting corners for years, exploiting loopholes in regulatory frameworks to boost profits. And worst of all, they'd ignore my warnings about the risks involved. I sat in my office late one night, staring at the documents spread across my desk. Clara had warned me not to burn bridges, but this wasn't about revenge. This was bigger than me. If these practices came to light, it wouldn't just hurt Pinnacle. It would expose systemic corruption within the industry. But exposing them meant putting myself in the crosshairs. Was I ready for that? I decided to confront Richard face to face. I owed him and myself that much. We met in a private conference room at a neutral location, a high-end hotel overlooking Central Park. Richard arrived flanked by two lawyers, their presence a clear indication of how seriously he took this meeting. "Let's cut to the chase," I said, sliding a folder across the table. Inside were copies of the incriminating documents. This is what happens when you ignore someone who's trying to protect your company. These practices are unsustainable and illegal. Richard's jaw tightened as he flipped through the pages. His lawyers exchanged uneasy glances, clearly unprepared for this revelation. "What do you want, Ethan?" Richard demanded, his voice low and dangerous. "Transparency," I replied firmly. "Full accountability from you and the board. No more sweeping problems under the rug. Fix this mess, or I'll hand these documents to the regulators myself." For the first time since I'd known him, Richard looked genuinely afraid. 2 days later, I found myself standing in front of Pinnacle's boardroom once again. This time, though, I wasn't there as an employee. I was there as an adversary. The board members sat around the table, their expressions ranging from shock to outright hostility. "This is extortion," one of them spat, glaring at me. "No," I corrected calmly. "This is leverage. You had your chance to fix things when I warned you. Instead, you chose to silence me. Now, you can either clean house and rebuild trust, or watch everything crumble." The room erupted into arguments, voices overlapping in a cacophony of panic and denial. Amidst the chaos, Clara caught my eye. She gave me a subtle nod, her way of saying she supported me, even if she couldn't say it aloud. When the noise finally died down, Richard spoke up, his voice trembling with barely contained fury. "And if we refuse, then I'll release every document to press," I said, meeting his gaze without flinching. "By tomorrow morning, your names will be splashed across every headline in the country." Silence fell over the room. For the first time, they understood the gravity of the situation. The days that followed were a whirlwind of power plays and counterattacks. Victor, desperate to save face, leaked false information to the media, accusing me of fabricating evidence to sabotage Pinnacle. The smear campaign gained traction quickly, painting me as a disgruntled ex-employee seeking revenge. But I was prepared. Through Jonathan's connections, I arranged an exclusive interview with a respected investigative journalist. Sitting in her studio, I laid out the facts, carefully, methodically, backed by irrefutable proof. By the time the segment aired, public opinion had shifted dramatically. Victor's lies unraveled almost instantly. Calls for his resignation flooded social media, while shareholders demanded answers from Pinnacle's leadership. The board convened an emergency session, ultimately voting to oust both Richard and Victor. Clara texted me afterward, her message simple but heartfelt. "You did it." The final showdown came during a shareholders' meeting held at a packed auditorium. I walked in wearing a tailored suit, my head held high despite the hundreds of eyes fixed on me. Richard sat at the front, pale and defeated, while Victor glared daggers from the sidelines. When it was my turn to speak, I stepped up the podium and addressed the crowd. For years, I gave everything I had to Pinnacle Capital Group. I began, my voice steady and commanding. I doubled their profits, streamlined our operations, and built relationships that kept this company afloat. But instead of valuing my contributions, they dismissed me as expendable. Today, I'm here to show you exactly what happens when you treat people that way. As I presented the evidence of Pinnacle's misconduct, the room grew eerily silent. When I finished, the reaction was immediate. Gasps, murmurs, and eventually applause. Richard tried to defend himself, but his words fell flat. The damage was done. By the end of the meeting, the board had voted unanimously to remove him and Victor from their positions. As I left the auditorium, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders, a weight I hadn't realized I'd been carrying for years. The aftermath of the shareholders' meeting was nothing short of a media circus. Headlines blared across every major outlet. Pinnacle's downfall, the man who exposed corporate greed, and Ethan Carter, from expendable to indispensable. Reporters camped outside my office, desperate for an exclusive follow-up interview. I declined them all. This wasn't about fame or vindication. It was about accountability. Pinnacle, meanwhile, was in shambles. With Richard and Victor ousted, the board scrambled to find new leadership. Clara emerged as a surprising candidate for interim CEO. She called me the day after her appointment, her voice tinged with disbelief. "I never wanted this," she admitted, "but someone has to clean up the mess." "You'll do great," I assured her. "Just remember, transparency is key. People respect honesty, even when it hurts." Clara took my advice to heart, implementing sweeping reforms aimed at rebuilding trust within the company. She held town halls where employees could voice their concerns, introduced stricter ethical guidelines, and even launched an initiative to support mental health in the workplace. Slowly but surely, Pinnacle began to stabilize. Still, I couldn't bring myself to visit the office. Not yet. Too many memories lingered there, ghosts of battles fought and won. Instead, I focused on growing Carter and Reed strategies, channeling my energy into helping other companies avoid the same mistakes. As the dust settled, I found myself reflecting on everything that had happened. For years, I defined myself by my work, the numbers I crunched, the profits I generated, the accolades I earned. But now, standing on the other side of the storm, I realized something profound. Success isn't measured by titles or paychecks. It's measured by impact. Carter and Reed strategies flourished under our shared vision. Jonathan and I built a team of brilliant minds who shared our commitment to integrity and innovation. Our clients weren't just corporations. They were communities, startups, nonprofits. Each project reminded me why I'd fallen in love with strategy in the first place. The thrill of solving problems, the satisfaction of seeing progress unfold. One evening, as I reviewed quarterly reports, Jonathan joined me in my office, a rare glass of scotch in hand. "You've come a long way, kid," he said, raising his glass, "to redemption and growth." I clinked my glass against his, smiling despite the bittersweet weight of his words. Redemption wasn't easy, but it was worth it. Life outside Pinnacle felt lighter. Without the constant pressure to prove myself, I rediscovered hobbies I'd abandoned years ago. Photography, hiking, even cooking. On weekends, I explored hidden corners of New York City, capturing moments through my camera lens. Clara kept me updated on Pinnacle's progress, often invited me to informal dinners with former colleagues. At first, I hesitated. Old wounds still lingered, but eventually I accepted. Sitting around a table with people I once considered family, I realized forgiveness wasn't about forgetting. It was about moving forward. Meanwhile, Carter and Reed strategies continued to thrive. We expanded our services, launched workshops, and even partnered with universities to mentor aspiring strategists. Seeing young professionals light up with excitement over ideas they hadn't considered before filled me with a sense of purpose I'd never experienced at Pinnacle. Months later, I received an unexpected email from Richard Whitmore. "Ethan, I know I don't deserve your time, but I'd like to meet, if you're willing. There are things I need to say. Things I should have said a long time ago." "Richard," I stared at the screen for a long time, debating whether to respond. Part of me wanted to delete the message and move on, but another part, a quieter, more compassionate part, wondered if closure was possible. We met at a quiet cafe near Union Square. Richard looked older than I remembered. his usual confidence replaced by humility. He ordered coffee but barely touched it, his hands trembling slightly as he spoke. "I was wrong about you, Ethan," he admitted, his voice raw with emotion. "You weren't expendable. You were extraordinary. And I failed you, as a leader, as a person." His apology caught me off guard. For so long, I'd imagined this moment, rehearsing cutting remarks and triumphant retorts. But now, sitting across from him, I felt only peace. "Thank you for saying that," I replied, choosing my words carefully. "It takes courage to admit when you're wrong. Don't waste it." Richard nodded, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I won't." As we parted ways, I realized forgiveness wasn't just for him. It was for me, too. Letting go of bitterness freed me to focus on what truly mattered, building a future worth fighting for. By the end of the year, Carter and Reed Strategies had become one of the most sought-after consulting firms in the industry. Our name carried weight, not because of fear, but because of trust. Clients knew we wouldn't sugarcoat the truth or shy away from tough decisions. We delivered results, plain and simple. At a holiday party hosted by Jonathan, I stood on the balcony overlooking Manhattan, watching the city lights twinkle like stars. Clara joined me, handing me a glass of champagne. "To surviving the impossible," she toasted, her smile warm and genuine. "And thriving anyway," I added, clinking my glass against hers. For the first time in years, I felt truly free, not bound by resentment or regret, but propelled by hope. Hope for the future, for the people I worked with, and for the legacy I hope to leave behind. Just as I thought I closed a chapter on Pinnacle forever, an anonymous tip arrived in my inbox. Attached was a series of emails between Victor Hale and several executives at rival firms. In them, Victor outlined plans to discredit me publicly, accusing me of orchestrating Pinnacle's downfall out of spite. My blood boiled as I read through the documents. Even after everything, Victor was still trying to drag me down. But instead of reacting impulsively, I smiled. Using my network, I exposed Victor's schemes to the press, framing them as a desperate attempt to tarnish my reputation. The backlash was swift and brutal. Within days, Victor was blacklisted from the industry, his career effectively over. When Clara called to congratulate me, I shrugged it off. He dug his own grave. I said simply, all I did was shine a light. Victor's downfall marked the final act in this saga. Watching him unravel served as a reminder of how fragile power truly is. Those who cling to it at the expense of others inevitably fall hardest. But justice wasn't just about punishing wrongdoing. It was about creating change. Through Carter and Reed Strategies, I championed initiatives aimed at fostering ethical leadership and empowering employees to speak up without fear of retaliation. My story became a case study in business schools, a testament to the importance of integrity in leadership. One evening, as I addressed a group of MBA students, I shared a piece of advice I wished I'd heard earlier in my career. Your value isn't determined by what others think of you. It's determined by what you believe about yourself. Stand firm in your convictions, even when the world tries to convince you otherwise. The room erupted in applause, but the real victory wasn't in the recognition. It was in knowing I'd made a difference. Years later, as I sat in my office overlooking Central Park, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. From the cubicles of Pinnacle to the helm of my own firm, every step had shaped me into the person I was today. Clara stopped by unexpectedly, bringing news that Pinnacle had been nominated for an award recognizing corporate responsibility. "They're crediting you for inspiring the changes," she said, grinning. I laughed, shaking my head. "They can credit themselves. I just gave them a push." As she left, I turned back to window, watching the sun dip below the horizon. Somewhere out there, young professionals were dreaming of making their mark on the world, just as I once had. And maybe, just maybe, my story would remind them that no matter how expendable the world tries to make you feel, your contributions matter. Your voice matters. You matter. With that thought, I closed my laptop and stepped out into the night, ready to face whatever came next.